The hottest topic in hockey recently had very little to do with the game itself.
Canada-Russia final showcasing the two most talked about prospects in the world. Canada's Shane Hollander.
Shane Hollander, I wanted to introduce myself.
Okay.
And Russia's Ilya Rozanov.
It was a Canadian television show called Heated Rivalry. Based on the book series by Rachel Reed and adapted, written, and directed by Jacob Tierney, the show landed quietly and then absolutely detonated.
It's the hot hockey romance series steaming up screens around the world, and it's Canadian.
Between the first episode and the sixth and final one of this season, viewership increased tenfold, according to Luminate. It shocked both the hockey world and the television industry. Heated Rivalry is a gay love story between two professional hockey players who are fierce rivals in a fictional league that's clearly meant to be the NHL. Hockey doesn't really have the greatest track record when it comes to queer inclusivity, so there wasn't really any sign for how this show would do. But in December, something kind of remarkable happened. A trailer for Heated Rivalry appeared on the Jumbotron during a Montreal Canadiens game at the Bell Centre. And a few weeks later, the Boston Bruins referenced the show in a social media post after a game against the Canadiens. Fans immediately caught the joke. The two teams involved in the show are meant to be the Canadiens and the Bruins. Hockey culture was tipping a hat to the show's popularity. And just last week, the show's stars, Connor Story and Hudson Williams, appeared on Late Night on Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers' shows. So Heated Rivalry has gone mainstream. Hockey has been deeply shaped by a hyper-masculine culture, but former players have been steadily pushing for change. Brock McGillis, a former professional player who is now openly gay, is currently on an NHL-sponsored tour across Canada aimed at challenging long-standing locker room norms. And a show like this offers a rare positive reference point.
The president of the Cutting Edges and LGBTQ2+ Hockey Association says the new TV series Heated Rivalry has hit close to home.
I think it's a representation that a lot of us kind of hoped for when we were younger and playing sports and playing hockey.
Watching the show gave Matt Kenny, who played competitive hockey as a child, the courage to open up publicly about a teenage relationship with a closeted teammate and how it ultimately led him to quit the sport. Harrison Brown, the first professional trans hockey player, who's now an actor, even appeared in a small role on the show. Conversations around inclusion in hockey have been slow to permeate pop culture, but Heated Rivalry gave those conversations new visibility and moved them into places where they're harder to dismiss. 2 years after the NHL briefly banned rainbow-colored pride tape before reversing course, the league's public posture appears to be shifting. In an email statement to CBC Radio, the NHL's chief communications officer, John Weinstein, said, quote, "This phenomenon is continuing to bring new fans into the sport of hockey, and as stewards of the world's greatest game, we welcome every fan to the party." That framing matters in a sport that has historically struggled with who it imagines as its audience. The open question now is whether this moment stays on screen or whether Heated Rivalry actually leaves a lasting mark on the league itself. Hey everyone, it's Kavitha Davidson, and welcome to the first episode of Sportly in 2026. Now, we don't usually talk about TV on this podcast, but Heated Rivalry became kind of impossible to ignore for anyone who cares about queer rights in sports or, frankly, just compelling television. So for this episode, I invited two incredible women to help me break down the conversation around the series and what it might mean, if anything, for hockey culture. First up is Dr. Amira Rose Davis. She's a historian and an assistant professor of African and African diaspora studies at the University of Texas, Austin, where her work focuses on race, gender, sports, and politics. She's the author of the forthcoming book, Can't Eat a Medal, which examines the lives and labor of Black women athletes during the Jim Crow era. You've likely heard her voice on NPR, ESPN, or the BBC, and her expertise has made her a trusted advisor for teams and leagues across sports. Joining her is Dr. Jessica Luther, a freelance journalist based in Austin and a friend of the pod. Her reporting has appeared in outlets including the New York Times Magazine, ESPN the Magazine, and Sports Illustrated. And she's had a long focus on sports culture and the realities that exist off the field. She's the author of Unsportsmanlike Conduct and also Loving Sports When They Don't Love You Back, which we co-authored together. Jessica has been a guest on our show before and always brings a sharp and clear-eyed perspective on what it means to care about sports while still holding the industry accountable. Jessica and Amira are also co-hosts of the excellent podcast Burn It All Down, along with Shireen Ahmed, Lindsay Gibbs, and Dr. Brenda Elsey. So in this episode, we talk about Heated Rivalry, why the show landed the way it did, and what it reveals about hockey, fandom, and the stories the sport has been willing or unwilling to tell. So welcome to Sportly, Jessica and Amira. Jessica, you've been here before. Amira, your first time. So happy to have both of you here.
So excited to be here.
We're so excited.
Jessica, when I texted you and I was like, do you want to come on and talk about Heated Rivalry? You immediately were like, oh my God, yes. And also
probably in all caps.
Probably in all caps. I wanted to talk to both of you about this because you're both extremely smart women. You're both academics. You both love romance novels, which is kind of the origin of this as well. And I feel like there's just a lot here. And it's sports adjacent, you know, there's some hockey in here too.
I mean, the NHL is putting out press releases about it.
It's amazing. And like, do we think, well, we can get to this, but do we think in the second season they can actually call them the Bruins and the Canadians? Like,
not anymore. There's too much merch in the world.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. That's true. I know that both of you have read the books. Amira, actually, I think you've read the whole series, right?
Almost the whole. I did 2, 1, 6, 5.
Well, so I guess, Amira, when you first read these books, did you think these would make very good television?
Well, I did it opposite. So I had the book on Kindle and hadn't started it. And then the show came out and I watched the first 2 episodes and I said, oh, I think I should read the book. And I read it that day.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then the 3rd episode aired, which features a couple from a different book. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, wait, I'm going to read that book. And I read it that night. Mm-hmm. And then I read The Long Game, which is the sequel to Heated Rivalry, because I wanted to continue the story. So it was interesting because I got the show first technically, but not the entire airing of it. So it was like the first, I would say, quarter of the book I watched as the show first and then read the book. I've read the book multiple times at this point because every time an episode would end, it's so faithful to the book. I could pick up the book from that place and then keep reading it. At that point, I knew that there was something really special with the adaptation happening.
Jessica, what's your experience been like with the book versus the show?
I was very similar to Amira. I think I watched the first 2 episodes and then I read the entire book. And then after each episode, I would read to the next thing. I have read that one and I've read The Long Game, which is the sequel, which I guess some of season 2 will be based on. Yeah, it's an incredibly faithful adaptation. I often walk around as a romance novel fan wondering why there are not more adaptations of these incredibly good and fun and lovely stories that are just sitting there ready to be adapted. But it's been really, really fun to see people who've never experienced this genre this way just like embrace this so fully. It has just been such a joy in the midst of such crap.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll get to that. Is there something specific about the sports romance genre that you think translates really well to broader audiences? Like, all 3 of us are obviously sports fans. We have made sports in some way part of our careers. But like, what is it about the sports part of the romance genre? And a romance genre that obviously is mostly catered towards straight women.
So I love sports romance, and I have for many, many years, in part because a lot of the work that I do on sports is bad. It's about the shitty part of sports, that underbelly that a lot of people don't really want to acknowledge and don't want to think about. And I actually read them in part because it is a fantasy on some level, right? It's the sports world, it's the athletes, it's the coaches that I want to believe are out there and are, you know, quote unquote good. So it's allowed me that fantasy for a really long time. And I think that's part of what's happening around Heated Rivalry is this belief that like hockey can be the thing we want it to be if we would just let it be that. We're also, of course, going to, I'm sure, experience plenty of pushback to that because hockey is not what we want it to be. But yeah, it functions for me in a lot of ways as fantasy. And it works really well. I want Amira to talk about this because she's very good at this, about why having this set in the world of hockey is so important. But like one reason is it gives this larger contextual umbrella of like homophobia. Part of what's happening here is that we all understand that male sports, men's sports are homophobic at their core, right? Like we don't need anyone to explain to us why these two men are not coming out, like why this relationship is secret. We already know that. Like that's a given. But yeah, the sports part of it is critical, I think, to why this works so well.
And I find that the other thing with sports romance is, and I would say that I think it's catered to women, but I also think, I just want to push back slightly on the fact that there's a presumption that it's just straight women reading this. And I think there's a lot of queer women who also love sports romances and read sports romances of all types. And I think that a lot of the discourse around like the demographics of fans of this book and romance in general has, I think, continues as straight women, and there's been so many bi women and lesbians and queer women who are absolutely part of the communities who also support this genre. But I do think sports romances, in particular, for me, like I love F1 romances, right? Like I'm not somebody who reads a ton of sports romance because I like dark romance. Like my Kindle should never be by anybody.
This is one thing about talking about romance novels is it's a vulnerable thing to do, because you're like, if you're going to talk about the ones you love, you're really giving a lot of away about yourself.
And
Yes.
so for me, it's like I read F1 romances because, I'm obsessed with F1, but like generally I read like really kind of darker romances. But me and Jessica had the same conversation about Challengers, like why tennis worked for that movie and what about that sport in particular. And I think with hockey, we can have a similar conversation, especially with like what touch we're used to in what places. And so I'm thinking here, I just came back from the American Studies Association, where I'm a co-chair of the Sports Studies Caucus. And we had a great panel there called Did They Touch, which was about intimate forms of touching in sport and all the things layered into that. And so I think one of the ways to explain this is, if you recall in episode 5, when Ilya and Shane are playing on the same team finally at All-Star, and they assist and score together, and Ilya skates up to Shane and gives him a kiss on the side of his helmet. And the reason why he was able to do that is because that's absolutely acceptable proximity and touching behavior.
And not to cut you off, but specifically in the context of a sport like hockey that's not fully American, right? Like Europeans and Russians and Canadian men have a lot more embracing of physical affection than American men do.
Exactly. And so I think like one of the things that to me is funny and that like Jacob Tierney I think really gets as a hockey fan, it's all the ways that hockey was already giving sex or already get like the hockey stretches. Like there's all these little times in the show where he has somebody doing a hockey stretch. And
There's
I
so
watch
much
a lot
stretching
of people,
in the show. I'm all about
There's so much
it.
stretching.
They
but
look
it's-
like they're humping the ice.
Exactly.
Like,
And that's a legitimate hockey stretch. And I love that Jacob is like, here's all the things that are already happening in this sport.
he has that great moment in episode 4 where they're playing against, it's a montage, and they're playing against each other. At one point, Ilya puts Shane up against the glass, and then he immediately cuts to Ilya fucking Shane. Like it works perfectly.
The
right?
back check to back shot transition.
Yeah, the homoeroticism of the sport lends itself really nicely also to like telling the story, right? Which is always a funny thing about male sports, is all of what Amir is talking about with the intimacy and the touching and this allowed space of emotion. We can certainly talk about masculinity in this show and what it's doing, but it's an incredibly masculine space, right?
Yeah.
And then the last thing I think Jessica already said, the sports is so necessary to tell this particular story, because also, and as people who talk about sports as labor, it's really important. Like when Ilya is talking about the constraints of coming out, and he's asking about like, we need a plan for my citizenship, because what if I come out and I lose my job and I cannot actually stay in Boston because I have now lost my job and then therefore my visa and I have to go back to Russia. That's a labor issue, because this is his profession, which Jacob, I think, elevates this in the show versus the book, the discourse around Shane's identity and the additional pressure, whether it's the reporter saying, you know, you're like Tiger Woods or Serena Williams, or the additional pressure of being a racialized representative in a sport where you're a heavy minority, and what that means for the visibility, like the responsibility that you feel for how you have to show up in various spaces and as this kind of role model, this idol. And I think that those things we can see through sport and through hockey in ways that in other fields of play or lines of work might not move that story to the forefront in the same way.
Right. Amira, I love that you did push back and point out that it's not just straight women who love this genre and particularly this show. And obviously gay men love this show as well. But I have, and I texted Jessica this when we first talking about this on an episode, I have loved how my queer women friends, my lesbians in my life, love this show. And obviously fucking Kara Swisher has talked about this on every podcast she's been on, which I think is amazing. Like, obviously the actual depiction of the sex is very hot, but it's interesting to me that like lesbians who like on the surface would not care about sex between two gay men really enjoy this show. And I'm wondering if either of you have thoughts on why, like what the appeal is there. And what I have kind of distilled down or heard said in some ways is that straight or gay, queer, wherever on the spectrum, it depicts a tenderness among men that we just don't see. We don't see depicted. We are certainly not experiencing in public life right now. And it feels safe. Like these are men that it feels safe to be among.
Yes. The conversation of like, why do women like this has made me like insane. I'm like, have you met men? I mean,
the whole thing is an idealized version of everything, right?
Yeah. I mean, on some level, yes. Like of course we are attracted to this kind of softness and tenderness and like, sure, the sex is great and it's hot and these men are beautiful. But even in those first two episodes where the sex is very hot, they're doing a lot of work, right? Like you're learning a lot about these men and their care for each other in those scenes. And it makes so much sense to me that anyone who likes love would be attracted to that, no matter like how it's coming across. And also, these men are lovely. I think it does matter that the two actors, Hudson Williams, who plays Shane, and Connor Story, who plays Ilya, are also adorable. And they're on this media blitz, and like watching them also feels very, I guess, quote unquote, safe. Like the fact that these two men are so lovely together, that makes sense to me that people want to watch that, even if they don't see themselves portrayed on screen.
And I'm always a little perplexed by this discourse around it. I mean, like also irritated for various reasons, like Jessica said, but perplexed because like gay people watch so much straight romance all the time.
All the time.
Exactly what Jessica said is like, if they're not necessarily seeing themselves portrayed on scene, like women of all stripes are constantly like having to, identify with male protagonists.
And not only are queer people watching het norm relationships across media all the time, but I also, to racialize it, like I'm not attracted to white men. And like, it's just like, I watch so many white couples in movies. And like one of my favorite reactors to this show is a Black queer man. And my favorite line he said in watching the second episode during one of the sex scenes, he was like, "Can we get this in black?" Uh-huh. And I was like, and it's so funny. It doesn't detract from how much the show speaks and you get the love and you get the yearning. But again, right, like the idea that like we consume media all the time that doesn't have to be exactly tailored to us. Like we find things in it. And I think like that's what the invitation of so much cultural production is. It's an invitation to find pieces of yourself in something that can feel close to you and feel far away. And I think it's beautiful. I've been reading some beautiful people coming out and talking about how much it mirrored their experience, how kind of visceral it was to see a depiction of being closeted or a depiction of being queer in professional sports spaces. And I think for a group of people, this is speaking particularly to their experience. You heard Hudson talk about how they've had many professional athletes reach out and say, "I'm closeted still, and this speaks to me." And also all of the other people who have found nuggets of resonance in it is exactly what we want from culture and from media. Like, I watch things to find stuff about the human condition, and that doesn't have to mirror my life exactly for me to feel and to experience. And it's actually like that invitation to broaden your world by finding the entry point that you do understand, and then learning about things or having a new perspective of something that stretches your imagination or stretches your worldview. And I think like that is why I read books, right? That is why I watch things. And so for me, sometimes when the conversation was like, well, why do people like this? Like, besides the fact that it's hot and the cinematography is great and the acting is marvelous and it's funny and it's witty and the pacing works for ADHD girlies like me, like all of those things, then also because we find parts of ourselves in it.
I also think, and this is building on what Amira is saying, and I've heard both Hudson Williams and Connor Story say this, that people have said to them, there's also kind of a relief to not be on screen. Like, not seeing yourself, you don't have to think about like how you would be in that situation, in this like emotional, even sexual situations. You don't have to think about like you in there. You can just watch. And like, there is kind of a relief to that for a lot of people. That's why plenty of straight women read male romance novels, right? Because you're not thinking about like your positionality in that space. You can just enjoy it.
Right. Amira, to go back to the commentator that you said, who said, can we get this but in black? It's funny because when you said that, I immediately thought, well, we're going to have to pick another sport than hockey. However, the racial representation on these teams is obviously way higher than it is in real life. And as we've established, this is an idealized version of this sport and of this league. But there also were a couple of players where I was like, oh, that's Anthony Duclair. Like, you know what I mean?
JJ.
Yeah, like 100%, right?
Yeah.
So like, what are both of you, but like, what are your thoughts on the world that they've built here? It is so multicultural. It's very Toronto, right? Which to translate to American stats is pretty close to New York in like the way that it's built and the density and the multiculturalism.
Can I say something really quick? Obviously, I'm not the expert here, but I want to say something about hockey romance in general. Within the last year, 2 years, there's been a whole thing around book talk and hockey romances and a huge discussion within that community about the fact that those are so popular because you don't have to include race, or it's not as obvious when you are not including race. Like if you're going to write a series about a football team and you're not going to include Black men in it, it's very obvious that you are just choosing directly not to. But if you do a hockey team, it's much easier. And so there's actually been a very robust conversation within romance, and this has been for many years, but there was a whole book talk thing in the last couple of years where this was very much a discussion. And so on some level, kudos to Jacob Tierney for not doing that version of it, and Rachel Reed for writing, we can talk about like the limits of her books, but like she does have these characters on the page in her books that allowed Jacob to adopt this. But this has actually been a humongous conversation and a difficult one within where like romance readers don't like to hear that there might be race and racism involved in like what they're choosing to read and prop up. And hockey specifically is a space where that's been talked about a lot.
Yeah, exactly. I think Jess is exactly right here. And I do think for me that Jacob Tierney was so intentional about saying like the limits of hockey are what they are. And here's how we can also bring a cast in that feels more diverse and more grounded. Like, especially when we think about Kip and Kip's friend group, they're in New York. Absolutely. His queer friend group is mostly queer folks of color, like
they're in New York, but it's very, very clearly filmed in Toronto. I'm just going to say
my favorite thing was, cause a lot of it was filmed in Hamilton. And so somebody tweeted Heated Rivalry is Hamilton propaganda. And somebody was like, the driver, the musical. And somebody was like, the city ? And I just have been laughing about that for weeks. But yeah, I think that you have those decisions, whether it's the characters that were already existing in Rachel Reed's book, like JJ, like Carter Vaughn, Shane, obviously, but then also the casting choices like Svetlana, played by Ksenia Daniela, who I adore.
We have a Black mixed race Russian American woman.
Yes. Trinidadian, lineage, and she's phenomenal. There's been interesting discourse around Miles, who is Rose's best friend, and the scene, probably the only book to show adaptation that I paused at, was the scene in the club when Miles is dancing with Shane, because in the book, in that moment, what's happening is that Rose is actually in the middle, and Shane and Miles are looking each other's eyes. And it's part of Shane's kind of reckoning with his sexual identity, because there he is dancing with Rose, but he's looking at Miles. And this is before he knows that Ilya's in the club. So it's actually a moment that represents his kind of internal struggle between his navigation. And I understand how that scene was supposed to carry that same weight in that moment in the club. But I think many people pointed out that the response to white viewers to Miles was like, oh, he's so predatory, and what is he doing? And that was racially charged language that a lot of I've seen a lot of Black creators in the last week push back on, and to say how can you read him dancing close as predatory but not other actions that other characters take, like jacking off in front of somebody in a shower, right? And so they're saying, I saw somebody say in a way that I really appreciate, which is in that you can see both the desire of this production team to say, let's have a diverse cast, and the kind of limits of a kind of Canadian racialized context to not have a moment of pause to say, do we shoot this like this with the one queer Black male character in this show? Could it be read a different way, right? And I think it's not something that really disturbed me, but it was something that I was oh, here's a subtle way that race is working, right? Because that is read by a largely white audience in this predatory way, when actually in this book, this was about Shane's navigation internally and not about somebody overstepping a boundary. Also somebody was saying and also people just dance on each other in clubs, they had been friends before, this wasn't out of pocket. I don't think we get that depth. I understand how people can see that scene and be wait, what is he doing? Because I've watched a lot of reactions to this, and it always is a scene that people react viscerally to.
Wow. See, I had no idea.
Yeah, I'm not.
That makes sense now that you're saying it, but I had no idea.
I mean, I've watched a lot of reactors. I've watched queer reactors. Yes. I've watched straight reactors. I've watched all the straight men who watch the show.
In that one scene, you've got at least two very long-standing tropes, which is the predatory Black man and the predatory gay man. The gay man who's going to turn you gay, or if you're a little bit questioning.
Exactly. And so I think when it's been interesting as I've watched more reactors watch it, the fact that that's always the moment where they're oh, what's happening? Right. And then you don't linger there, because very quickly he walks over to Ilya, and then you have that, and you have the needle drop, and that kind of overshadows it. But there's always this moment. So I understood, and I watched how discourse around Miles started. And I can see how for me, that was this one moment where it was this is a very Canadian context. The show is happening in Canada, hockey being the sport that it is in Canada, that we cannot remove it from that context. Even when people are HBO Max, we have to give crave its due and its flowers, and think about that context, but also think what it means to be Black and queer in Canada is a different context than in other spaces. And so for me, but I've appreciated the conversations coming out of that interaction. So I do think race is working here in all the ways that Jess laid out, and the ways that people are picking up on, and thinking about the constraints of hockey, but also the way that they tried to subvert the constraints by when Ksenia was casted, despite her name being Ksenia Daniela, I'm going to butcher her last name, but also she's related to one of the best Soviet hockey players of all time. And the fact that they were is she even Russian? And it's
her name is Ksenia.
Ksenia, yes. She is Russian. And so for me, that she's incredible in this show, and her role from the book is really elevated as well. But to me, that was really important, is being able to have diversity injected into the show, despite the sport of hockey remaining a struggle in that regard. Even though at the same time you have Nick Suzuki, it's kind of weird to have Shane, and then people have been playing clips of Suzuki getting picked for the Olympic team, and he was really excited. So thank you so much for the support. And they were like, oh, so Shane.
Right. I like that you brought up how that particular scene in the club with Miles is, especially if you've read the book, about Shane's internal struggle with his identity, with his sexuality. I've read a couple of critiques of the show that still love the show, and one of them was by Jim Downs at Slate. It was an interesting take for sure, and to kind of summarize, and please tell me if you disagree with my summary of his argument, he was basically saying that the show projects a conservative and kind of stuck in the past view of gay life being and gay struggle being internal about the gayness instead of about the people around you. And also I thought that there was an interesting thing in there where he did kind of point out that the women, they're mostly narrative devices and cover and things like that. So Amira, you've got thoughts. Let's go.
Kavitha, Jim is a colleague. But also I would just say, this is how media works. Jim wrote that piece in Slate, which I disagreed with a lot. I respect his expertise, and I think there's something to be said about telling stories past the closet. But I also think that this was an important story. But if you want to go right now and pick up a copy of the New York Times, you will find in print Jim's latest article, which is casting the show as radical and revolutionary. So I want to also hold space for people to change, I think, or to develop their ideas.
Or
and
to
I
have
think
more than one take on
more
something,
than one
for sure.
take on something. But like also, I think the nature of how the show was released, we saw this even in the discourse. You know, we had to wait a week between episodes. The first 2 episodes dropped.
It was awful.
You know,
I did not, by the way. I waited until like Christmas week and I watched all 6 episodes.
I know. I described it as edging. They were edging us by making us wait.
But also, like, if you were watching it as they were releasing, you got the first 2 episodes, which were sex heavy. And then we had a week off. And during that week, a lot of initial think pieces came out. And this is where you get a lot of stuff being like, it's just full of sex scenes and like all this stuff, like da-da-da-da. Then the 3rd episode drops. And for a week, you have discourse about why we settled with these characters and it's a completely different thing and disagreeing with we had that for a week. And then we got episode 4.
With the devastating club ending.
Exactly.
Where you're like,
and so you get a week of discourse at that moment about people who were like kind of confused about Ilya's characterization, I think really came at this high point where they were like, oh, well, he has girls too. And it's like, well, he knows he's bi. He's trying to ask Shane where he lies on the spectrum. Shane is in the exploratory mode. And where it ends, I think without reading the books, I was like, I know that I'm going to turn the page and Rose is immediately going to clock him. We're not going to like stay in this moment where she's like a beard or like he's forcing himself. And I understand how waiting a week, not knowing how long this is going to last, produced a different kind of set of conversation. And then, of course, after episode 5, I think it was just like anticipation for the cottage. Mm-hmm. But for me, because it was released in that way, there were a lot of, whether it was reactors or in-print takes or whatever, that I think shifted, I think were allowed to grow. And so for me, it's really interesting to actually read Jim's 2 pieces together because I think that it holds a lot more nuance towards, like, I think his second piece to me does that same history in terms of talking about really leaning into his tremendous research on queer life in the 70s and 80s. Also, he's done a lot around like health and stuff in the 19th century as well. And he's talking about that in his second piece as well. But I do think that sometimes we're in an industry that's like, what's your hook? What's your clickbait headline? What's the thing that's going to be? And sometimes that requires you to be performatively contrarian.
I also think this was such an interesting moment because there was such a heavy group of people who had read the book and knew the ending and also were very like familiar with romance as a genre. And so you had people writing about the show in the middle of the show who didn't know that we were going to get a happy ever after, whereas anyone who
You're like, that's the genre.
Yeah, like we're all gonna feel good in the end. And so you would read stuff and it was just clear that like they weren't familiar with the tropes and the like conventions of the genre and like where this was going. And I also think like there was a lot of not trusting Jacob as the creator, who is a gay man. Like one of the things we get in episode 6 that we do not get in the book is a discussion between Una and Shane and his mother that I think Tierney has said is like the thing he wanted to see on screen. and like he wrote it in, and it's beautiful and wonderful. So we're getting additional stuff from a gay creator that's adding to it. And again, like Amira said, if seeing it to the end changes how you feel about the entire thing, including episodes 1 and 2. If you go back and watch them after you've seen episode 6, you're going to see and feel different things than you did on its own. And so I think that was part of it. Yeah, the discourse has been hard, like as a romance fan. And there should be space for critique, obviously. It just feels hard sometimes when it's clear that it's coming out of a space where they don't totally understand the context from which they're writing.
Obviously, true to the book, this is, we're talking about Canada and Russia. I have kind of gone down the rabbit hole of wondering what this show would look like just in today's geopolitical climate if Shane were American. Is that a useful exercise at all? Have either of y'all thought about that?
Well, I mean, I think to me, the other piece of this too, somebody's it's also a period piece. Thinking about the show in 2008 or thinking about Ilya in 2017, talking about what citizenship he should get. He says in the book, it's a little more explicit. I want to come to Canada too, because being Russian in America right now, not the best. Right. And I really appreciate what happens when we remember that the years are actual years. Right. And we can think about that as a period piece too. Somebody said they start messing around in Obama's America and how.
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah.
And you need the Sochi Olympics, right? You couldn't write around that. That would have really messed up the timing. But yeah, no, I have absolutely thought about that. I think it's implied in the discussions around citizenship within the show. I mean, you can certainly, maybe it's not implied. Maybe I'm able to just write that right onto it. But you're I want to be a Canadian citizen. I understand.
I told our lovely co-host Shireen that this is one of my favorite things that Canada's ever done besides produce her. Right. Is this show.
We love Shireen.
And I do think context is so important, and I do think this is a story that also is really revealing about Canada and geopolitics and Russia, of course. And I think if this was based on an American athlete, it would change the contours of that. But also it changes it to me a little bit because hockey in the United States occupies a different position than it does in Canada. We talk about hockey culture a lot, but the other reality of it is it doesn't locate the same cultural weight as a football or basketball would in the American context, which is not to say that we've seen, out hockey players in the AHL, we understand that's across these borders as well. But I do think to me, the Canadian context of it is really important. And the Canadian-Russian relationship is very, of course, different than American would be. So I appreciate us remembering to ground it in the context that it's in. And I'm so happy that American production company did not pick this up.
And I also wonder if there's an aspect of, because hockey doesn't hold the same cultural space in America, that sports fans, particularly sports fans who might be more toxic or might be inclined to be more toxic, are able to separate that from the actual art of the show because they're not clouded by football brain or something.
Yeah. I saw somebody's tweet. It was this one hockey bro was so mad because he was we already don't get respect as a big four sport, and now they're just gonna all think we're gay. And I was you're doing the thing,
right? You're doing this to yourself. So that is kind of where I wanted to bring this back around, because it is. I do still host a sports podcast. The actual hockey, the actual on ice hockey, there have been a lot of reactions to this from hockey podcasts. And I'm wondering, as two people who are in the discourse, what your thoughts on that are.
Well, I will say, I'm a hockey girl again. I've watched 4 Bruins games in the last 2 weeks because I remembered how much
it goes full in.
Yeah. If I like something, it's probably.
Hockey is the best sport live. Probably my second or third favorite sport, but it is the best sport live.
Look, playoff hockey is my top 5, but hockey for me, especially with ADHD, is 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off, 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off. Is constant movement. I've always really liked hockey. I just have kind of moved away from watching it. The Bruins were also sucking, so I had to take a step back from it's how I have stopped watching football, but now the Patriots are good again, and I'm suddenly watching football again. So some of it I know is just really me shallow as a sports fan, but self-awareness is key. But I am watching hockey because I do miss the sport. And while I was watching the things, I was like, they're not moving nearly as fast as, and it made me miss the dynamics of the ice. So I have been watching hockey again. I didn't mind much of the hockey. I know they work so hard on the skating and they've talked about that. The thing that annoyed me the most, honestly, was how they ran. Like, I don't understand.
Running was so hard to watch.
So hard to watch. Like, I couldn't. That was my one thing.
I just would like someone to talk to Francois.
I was just like,
a little bit.
Why did you let him run like this? But honestly, I mean, there was like some debates. Of course, when Shane gets hit, across the thing, and Jacob was on What's Chaos. Before Jacob came on, one of the hosts was like, I would trade him immediately. Like, it was really funny because they were like, that is, you're taught from juniors. Like, you absolutely never look back going across the zone like that. So there was like a whole debate about it or whatever. When Jacob came on, they like kind of ribbed each other about it. And Jacob was like, well, that was the point I was trying to get, is that he's distracted. And like, for me, I didn't like it because I'm like, their game is distracted, but they've always been so professional that I have a hard time believing that Shane would be distracted to that magnitude. Right. That he would look back. That was like I like for dramatic effect, so you can see the effect on Ilya's face when he sees the hits coming and like all of that. I get it. And in the book, it's slightly different. How the hit occurs, like he's not looking back, he's not distracted.
Is it a cross check and open ice
like,
in the book?
They're bringing two scenes together. Okay. There.
Because the hit itself, I was like, to speak to your point, the skating's not fast enough for that hit to really occur like that in real life, like an open ice. And I feel like, I think it's
later in the game in the book. Okay. Isn't it like third period? Yeah. They're like well into it. Yeah. It doesn't.
Your legs aren't fully under you and like.
And he's hit, but it's not Marlo. It wasn't a dirty hit at all, but it was not. He wasn't like looking back lovingly. He's playing hockey. Right. They're playing hockey. He got pushed into the board. He also hit the board, and
so that was actually going to be my question, because I feel like as a hockey fan, that hit would have been a lot more realistic had it been a cross check against the boards instead of
he hit the board at that angle. That is dangerous. Yeah. He went into the board, which is absolutely a hockey injury that we see. Right. It's not an open ice hit like that. It's a lot about how you got hit into the board, and I think like that in the book is just done a little differently. But I do think that for me, that was those were like the little moments. But I'm not like a purist in the way that I'm like, oh, hockey's so awful, I can't watch it. There's some stuff like I feel like there's some shows about things where I'm like, this is so not what the sport would do, that it's hard, but that's not. I didn't feel like that here because there was also so little. Just like,
which has been an interesting thing. There's been all these wonderful like TikTok videos of people being like, don't worry, you don't have to understand hockey. Like they're not going to force the rules of hockey down your throat in order for you.
I know nothing about hockey still.
Right. Yeah.
But for me, it did, Kavitha, like I was like, oh my God, but I miss how fast it.
I don't watch hockey and I could tell it was slow.
Like there's this one really nice camera angle where the camera is like, and I watched Real Rejects do it. So they talked a lot about the cinematography and I really liked them because they talked about how hard certain shots were. They were like, the mirror shots in the show were like some of the most tremendous camera work for them because, but there's at one point where they put the camera down. So you're basically on skate level as they're skating through. And I love that camera work. And I love the sound of it. And I was like, whoa, I miss hockey. That's when I started watching again. I was like, I think I'm going to watch hockey. I'm going to be in Boston a few weeks. And I was like, I'm so mad because the Bruins play on Thursday. I get there on Friday. On Saturday, they're away in Chicago. And I was like, why you hate me? Now all I want to do is go. And they're playing the fucking Habs right before I get there.
Oh my God, we're getting Bruins Canadians.
Well, they already played. They played when after episode 3 came out, and the social
Bruins
media team tweeted. Some might call it a heated rivalry.
Oh God,
like these teams. The fact. I mean, we can say whatever we want about like representation and its limits and stuff, but the fact that like actual NHL teams are playing the trailer of this show between periods on the Jumbotron matters. Like maybe it doesn't matter. Like it's not going to be the thing that shifts hockey culture, but like it matters to the people in that arena who see themselves on that screen in the middle of an actual hockey game. Like that.
And can I just say too, like I also want to give Jacob his kudos for him being a hockey fan. He's a legit hockey fan, and he did put nuggets in the show, like nods for hockey people. Like I think he was like, I know the skating's not skating, but so for instance, you have a moment where like the Boston team is founded in 1924, right? Like so there's little nuggets, or like the scene when they're playing video games together, and Elliot saying, I always wanted to know what it feels like to be a Metro. And he was like, yeah, more than the Yankees. Like, that's legit about, like, much to my chagrin, about what the Habs, you know, where they are in terms of like dynasties and things like that. And so I do appreciate that, even though that they're not the Bruins, right? Anything like that, they still used, if you know hockey, there were enough things in there that demonstrated that there was still an appreciation for how it mirrors onto the game.
Right. Jessica, there's been over the years so much conversation about the NHL's lack of embrace for its LGBTQ plus fans, and then the kind of
last season there was a whole thing,
the turnaround with, you know, quote unquote hockey is for everyone in that campaign. And I guess my question is about the opportunity, but also the opportunism with the show like this that can be presented to a league that has historically failed its queer fans, like the NHL.
Yeah, I mean, it's rough. It is good. I think, like I said, I think it matters that they're talking about the show and looking like they're embracing the show. The thing about the NHL is they could actually do shit that's like profound, like actual action around this to make the game more open and inclusive. They could do it. They could do it right now if they wanted to. So of course we should be very skeptical of like them just picking up on this viral thing and trying to use it to their advantage, because they could do things. They could be very, they could make them do Pride nights. They could do whatever. I mean, there's so much that people with power have here to make the sport better. So the press release, sure. I mean, but with anything in sport, any kind of institution, we should be skeptical of like the reason that they are finally on board. And the fact that like you are seeing all these players, the ones who no longer play, coming out with videos like Amira was talking about, saying how much this mirrors their experience, or Hudson Williams talking about the current athletes who are coming to, I assume it's a plenty of hockey players, especially. There is stuff to be done here in the real world. And this show, sure, it can be a stepping stone. You can use it that way. But I think we should all not hold our breath on the NHL actually doing anything here. So yeah, if they want to prove it, they can do things. And I just don't trust that will happen. But it does matter that this exists.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a lot of people were laughing about the NHL trying to figure out like how they were gonna, like, are they going to ignore it? Are they going to co-opt? I'm actually kind of entertained watching them tie themselves in knots around that, especially because like I know what's coming. Like the long game, like the commissioner is absolutely a fucking villain. Like I do not like that man. You know what I mean?
Which is right.
Like,
it feels
so right.
accurate,
and it's accurate in terms
true
of
to
like
life. True to life.
You know. But I also want to say like I have appreciated the way that, like, because I know we've talked about obviously on Burn It All Down, like stuff about like how they've capitulated to the worst elements of fandom and like taken away Pride nights and things like that. But I did also appreciate conversation that was happening in some hockey podcasts around Russian players who had talked about before, like the real threat of participating in it because of the way that the law is written in Russia, and how it's wielded on people, that you don't
what
have
it means
to
for their
be,
families.
Yeah, you don't have to be gay. You can, if you're just like next to the element. But like for me, that was such like an invitation to think more concretely about like what leagues do. Like we've talked about this like during the racial reckoning. Like you writing end racism does jack shit to end racism, right? Like you saying that in the end zone or
unity.
because you just paint over it. We see how easy it is to disappear. And so for me, it was also a kind of way to think through what institutional change looks like, that it's not wrapping a stick in rainbow tape, right? And that looks like why Pride Nights were important was about like the community around the sport, but then also I'm thinking about like Lewis Hamilton's work with Mission 44, which is like, okay.
I'm so impressed that you brought Lewis into this. Well done, Amira. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Away. So, but also with Mission 44, right? Because he was looking at the lack of diversity in motorsport, but what Mission 44 does is start really young, which is where you need to start, about opening up STEM careers. And it doesn't just focus on getting into the driver's seat. It's about being team principal. It's about being a mechanical engineer. It's about all of these things. And one of the things that I like most about what Shane and Ilias start is that they start a hockey school. And they start a hockey school that is staffed. And this is not a spoiler for Long Game, because this is actually the epilogue of Heated Rivalry that we didn't get where it ended. But you get, for me, a window of thinking about like what actually is more.
It's staffed with a bunch of queer hockey players. So the kids that are coming up that are going to this camp, that's who's coaching
That's
them.
the environment that they're coming up and learning the game from. And I just feel like, to me, especially when we see how easily undone these like minuscule liberal like reckonings were, like we're living in the aftermath of like 5 years ago, when we're all looking around like, wow, they're changing the name of the Washington football
black
team.
profile
and
pick activism.
Yeah. And we were like, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, like the Wildcat strike, and we writing this thing, and like everything's changed. And now we're here 5 years later, and we just see how easily uprooted. And like, I'm speaking of this in higher education, like, you know, we are losing jobs and people are being fired, and our classes are still, I'm working a syllabus that's going to be policed. It's because of how superficial those changes and claims were. And so for me, part of this conversation around hockey is an invitation to have a conversation away from the kind of surface level identity politics representation, to talk about what are we actually talking about when we're saying like, how do you change a culture, right? Like, where do you actually intervene, and who are you accountable to, and what does it mean to make this sport a place that people want to stay, you know, the stories that people have about when they stop playing, because they've already inherited and learned it when they were 8, when they were 9, when they were 12, when they were 19. Right. And so for me, this is as much about the NHL, sure, but I'm actually much more interested in youth, in juniors, in all the other ways that this can be an invitation to exploring how we make spaces welcoming and oriented towards inclusion and oriented towards belonging across any institutions we interface with. And so often that's not actually starting at the top. And so that will be a lot of the discourse, and that will be where the eyes are and how the league responds. And I think that's a really important part of it. But I'm also interested, if there's somebody watching this like and listening to the Straight Dude Bro Hockey podcast embrace this, right? Like, that's rhetoric, that's discourse, right? Like, if somebody's listening to that who's 15 and is like, maybe there's a different hockey future for me, that to me is what I'll be watching for.
This is so fascinating to me now that I'm thinking about like the NHL embracing this particular story, and even what Jim Downs was writing about the conservatism of the story. Like, on some level, yeah, sure, the NHL loves this book, because this book is about Scott Hunter, or this TV show. Like, it's an individual who has decided that he is going to do something for himself. And we understand that backstory beautifully with Kip. And so it's all on him, right? Like, that's why Una asks if they've talked to Scott Hunter. It's about this one individual man who has put himself forward as, and like, sure, I bet the NHL loves that. Like, that would be really great.
They
and
don't
easy.
have to do anything.
They don't have to do shit. And so it will be very interesting when we get to season 2. And I trust that Jacob is going to do this. I cross fingers. Like, keep the villain as the commissioner of the NHL, because that is how do you embrace that, right? Like, that really is asking the institution itself to look at itself. Whereas this season of Heated Rivalry is not necessarily asking. That is about the individual players and specifically about Scott Hunter himself.
And it's important to note too, like book 4 is a parallel book to The Long Game. So like they're on the same timeline. And the main character in book 4 has been blackballed by the league because he spoke out against a teammate who was a sexual assaulter. And the commissioner was equally as awful about that and closed ranks to protect the person who was abuser.
Yeah, there's a lot we could say about hockey culture that
and also was equally awful about race and the way he talks about identity. So there's a way that my excitement about The Long Game is that not only is this commissioner terrible, is like terrible in all the ways that we know that they're compounding and intersecting. It's about the protection of abusers. It's about racialized violence and trauma and the way that racism is baked into the institution. It's about homophobia. It's about all of these things. It's about the misogyny within that as well. And all of those things are what the commissioner is doing, and like in different points to different people. And so you can see like him as this defense of the institution of hockey, and like the threat to it is all of these things that would be different. And between books 4 and 5, you get that as the story. So it will be fun to see how they reckon and wrestle with that.
Yeah, because they already got their happy ever after. So we know that they're together. So the yearning part of it, it's the stress of the relationship versus the yearning. And so like Amira said much earlier in this conversation, it's much more exterior.
The exterior versus the interior.
And then that is why then NHL as an institution becomes an actual character, because we've moved beyond just these two men and what they feel for each other.
Two things about that. One is, this is why I fucking love talking to my smart friends about this, because if you take all of the like genre specific things and the content and the sexuality part of it out of it, just examining the discourse from a media studies perspective, thinking about the reaction to the first 2 episodes instead of the whole, and how these kinds of think pieces would have been written 10 years ago versus now, and 20 years ago versus 10 years ago versus now is really quite fascinating. But also, as somebody who is not like a huge, like, I'm just not very well versed in the romance novel thing, I did want to talk to you too about this, because you guys are, and I feel like I've gotten a lot of texts from people, well-meaning texts, about like, and not using this word in a pejorative way, but about how this is the most like cinematic smut they've ever seen. And like how, and you know, one person texted me about how, you know, whenever there's something that is for women and appealing to women's sexuality, or basically non-hetero, you know, non-cisgender hetero male sexuality, it is deemed as smut, even if it's not quote unquote like porn or something. So I guess I wanted to get both of your takes on, which is, this is going to be a very common, easy question that everyone who's into the romance genre gets, but kind of the distinction between porn and romance, if there needs to be one, women-made media, women-made porn in particular versus, you know, women-centered, again, non-binary centered things. And also just, you know, why, if that conversation even matters.
This is great because me and Jess have very different reactions to the word smut. So, Jess, you can go first.
Oh, well, I mean, I think a lot of the time when people use it, it's pejorative. Right. And that's why I react. I think I just am defensive to the word. Amira does not react that way.
No, I love the word smut, and I'm part of like the folks who've reclaimed it. I'm like, yeah, I tell people all the time, I read smut, fairy smut, sports smut. Like, I love that actually. But yeah.
I do have trouble with the way that people will use it as, and it flattens. There's a reductive quality to it, right? They don't want to take anything, all the stuff that we have been talking about masculinity and tenderness and yearning and all that, and they will just fully flatten it into blowjobs. And I get it. Like, that stuff's hot. It's beautifully well done. They have talked so much about the intimacy coordinator whose name I cannot remember.
Charla
Did a
something.
fantastic job. Like,
And it's funny to listen to them talk about watching the scenes afterwards, because for them it's choreography.
Right.
They are, and she's like yelling at them off screen, like knee, to like make sure that like you're not seeing anything. Amira and I were just texting about this. There's a show on Hulu called Dying for Sex, which is so beautiful. Everyone should watch it. You will cry very hard.
adding that.
But there's like all kinds of dicks. Like you see them. You at one point you are supposed to stare at one. Like that is part of what is happening. And I was like, it's so interesting, because this is like there's something about the idea that like that is highbrow.
Yeah.
Like that show. So therefore it's different. I don't think anyone would watch that and be like, this is smut, right? Like that's not the word that they would use. Or I was talking to my running friends about the show, and my friend was like, oh, the porn show. And I was like, no.
You immediately stop running. Like, no, actually.
I was like, excuse me, let me get on my podium here, or my soapbox, and I will explain.
He walked in for lunch when I was watching it at home, and he looked at him and he goes, oh, this is Hockey Hose.
Which, like I have pulled the curtain so that people can't see my TV.
I watched the first 2 episodes over Thanksgiving. I was at my parents' house, and Shane was getting a rim job from Ilya, and it was around that time. My dad and uncle were like in the next room, and I was like, maybe I'll watch it on my phone.
But just in case. So I do so a lot of the time I do think people are reducing so much of what is great about romance or the show or whatever into just like there's sex on the page. And I do think there's something, we live in a prudish, sexist society that feels a sort of titillation at the idea that women like sex. Like we're not supposed to. Like in this sort of, I'm going to be reductive here. Like we're supposed to be the receivers. We're not supposed to, it's not about our pleasure. It's about reproduction. Like all those kind of things, whether or not we want to admit it, like that's playing into this like, oh my God, women like sex. Women like to watch
Our role in
men
sex
have
is supposed to be passive.
Yes. And so there's a way that like, this is also about our own shit. Like people are bringing their own feelings about sex into this and like writing them onto the screen and their own stuff. So like all of this is mixed in. And I just hate the way that it just makes it all flatter than it is. It's so beautiful and whole. Like one of the things about the show is you really feel like Tierney and the people working with him have fully imagined this world and these characters and these people, and to just be like smut is like you're missing
and it's
it.
also just funny, like because if you like actually read, but like there's categories for a reason. There's subcategories of romance. So like when I was saying earlier, like I read dark romance, I also read erotica. That's smut, because that's a place where the sex is not necessarily driving the plot, and it's like much more high percent of the book, right? Like I just finished Rena Kent's second book of a dark hockey romance, and she writes in a way that is like, I would say there is just like a lot of sex, right? And it's not necessarily like in other subgenres of romance where it's like moving the plot along. It's just erotica. And so to me, it's almost laughable, because I'm like, y'all don't read.
Y'all don't even know what smut is.
You don't even know.
You don't even know.
Until you've read Harley LaRue, which, like, by the way, just finished her sapphic gothic novel that came out in October around Halloween, right? Like, unless you're reading the books that are actually smutty by design, right? When I go to like another subgenre of romance, like sports romance or like this, I'm like, this is so tame.
Like look at this vanilla.
I was like, I'm like, what are you there's like light power dynamics. Like,
and I like want to say, like, within romance, there are romances where there is no sex on the page.
Yeah.
It's called closed door, right? There's like, there can be implications. Sometimes there's nothing. There's like a kiss at the end.
Yeah.
And so like romance itself has a giant spectrum, but there is a lot of sex on the page, right? Like that is part of what people are coming to romance for.
But it's like interesting to me too on the show. Like I was saying this, I think a lot of this is about, hey, the cinematography is beautiful, but it's also like when we don't fade to back, like what do we get to linger on? And it is a plot device. Like it's important because most of their connection in early days in the first 2 episodes comes through the physical. We have to linger there. That's where they are. That's how they get to.
And that mirrors a whole lot of people's across the sexuality spectrum. Like experience.
You can have a
And,
physical
like,
relationship first. Like
Amira and I have talked about this. These are also young athletes. Like the way that the way that people understand you is through your body. The way you understand other people is through their bodies. Like that is your job, right? Is reading other people's body language and what they're doing. And so like, they're also horny. They're like young men.
But it's also like, super reductive to the show, because the highest rated episode of the show, and to me, one of the best episodes of television that I've seen in a very long time, is episode 5, where you do not, sex is still implied there. And actually, like, I screenshotted the 12 pages of the phone sex scene in the
fully
books.
written out.
That's written out, and I sent it to everybody who wanted it, because I'm like, this is, if you wanted the phone sex scene, here it is, because I love it, right? But I do think that that's part of the narrative device, is like, there's a point, right, where those scenes are great in the book, but they're also not driving the plot right there, which is why you don't need the full phone sex scene, because what was important was that they were FaceTiming for the first time, that he was supporting him this time, etc. Not like
that
what
he
they
liked
were
his
doing.
glasses.
Exactly. Not what they were necessarily doing there. Same with like when the significance of at All Star, when he's in the room, is their conversation, is the holding, is Ilya opening up. And when they leave, they're on the bed. It's implied they had sex, but you get the good night Shane, good night Ilya. That's what is driving the plot there. And so it's not, it doesn't,
which we know from episode 4, which had a much more explicit sex scene.
Exactly.
We know what the significance of the Ilya Shane saying each other's names is. We don't need the sex.
And so I do think like it is certainly, I've seen people be reductive about it, and I agree with Jess in this point of like people using it as dismissal. I also get very fiery when people are like, oh, it's just gay porn, and it's like, no, it's literally not.
Right.
Like,
It's literally not.
You've never watched gay porn if you think this is.
Can I also say,
what it is.
Amira said this to me, so I'm totally taking this from her, but kudos to the sound people. Whoever's holding that boom mic over these like, I don't know how they're capturing the sounds.
Yeah.
But like, it sounds naughty.
Yeah.
Like when
but
they
it also
are,
sounds like sex, like the
it sounds like
breathing
sex.
and like not,
you
know,
can close your eyes and have a sense of what is happening.
And-
so like, it is a full like sensory thing that they are giving you. There's not music laid on top of it. Like, you are experiencing it both through your eyes and your ears in a way that absolutely really ups like your experience of it.
And also like I have found it funny, like all the straight people who were like confused about position, like especially like some of the straight guys watching the show, like they'll be like, oh, what are they doing? Or like at the point when they have like fraudage on that scene in episode 4, and they're like, what is like people like that,
like, let
to
me draw
is
you a diagram.
so funny. Somebody drew a diagram with like melting popsicles. It's the best graphic in the world, but I'm cracking up about it because like, to me, it's really intriguing to see, like, for the first time people had to like, oh, there's multiple ways to have sex. I'm like, yeah, like what lives have people been living?
I'm going to say
but
that
like,
also tells me that these straight men are having some vanilla sex too, but
oh my God, no, some of the people have been telling
Yes.
themselves, like the same way that I'm telling myself about like my Kindle and what I read and all this stuff. People also, I'm concerned sometimes
On the
about
other
people's sex
side.
lives.
Yes.
Because I'm like, what you do? But I do think that like the sound, like Jessica was saying, but also, again, like this is the kind of latent homophobia, is like, if you watch Game of Thrones in the first episode and did not look away to incestual sex, if you're watching Euphoria and the scene they have 37 dicks, you know, like you'll be absolutely fine with the 8 minutes of this and the stuff that's modeled in it. Like, I love that so many of the male reactors, whether they're straight or queer, watching it during when they finally have sex in episode 2 are like, oh, Ilya's consent king, because he's always checking in. He's like, there's something that was like really reassuring to see men talk about consent in reaction to it, right? And so like, again, I just feel bad, honestly, for people who deprive themselves of all the other emotions that are packed into this show because they think it's just slop. Like, actually, what I get more offended is when people are calling it slop or talking about like,
well, it's certainly
women
not slop,
fetishizing
right.
the show.
That's terrible.
Well, this is like, I mean, the online spaces that I have been in.
Let her explain.
You know,
Can I
but
just like, I want to say one thing about the sex that is so wonderful in the way that Tierney clearly had. I mean, I just can't say enough about like what he has brought to this adaptation. It is incredible. Like, we are talking almost verbatim conversations. I'm assuming that, are we assuming all the listeners have watched this TV show?
Yes, but if they haven't, they're gonna.
Well, I just want to
Spoiler.
say, like if you had read the book, you knew how the end of episode 5 was going to happen. Like, it is a huge break in the book itself. You knew what line was coming. It is so rewarding. I have watched that over and over and over and over again on screen because it's so, oh God, it just feels so good. And I've listened to that song by Wolf Parade like 1 million times, and it makes me so happy every time. But anyway, Tierney has clearly fully thought through all of this. And so there's this, again, if you have watched it from the beginning to the end and you go back to episode 1, there's a mirror from episode 1 and episode 6 with the blowjob. And
With all of this, like there's all
with
these
all
ones.
of the sex, where he is specifically putting them next to each other. You get like the darkness in episode 1 and the lightness in episode 6, but like literally like where Ilya puts his hand, like it is exact choreography that matches so that you can see the growth in their relationship through the sex too, right? Like he's made it clear that that is really important to the characters in all the different ways, including the way that 1 and 6 and 2 and 6 mirror each other when they're actually having sex.
Which I love because it's like you're going from dark hotel rooms, like, you know, when Shane is like, is the light on? Is the light off? Right? Where he's concerned
There's
about
too
the
many
windows.
windows,
Right.
yeah.
To Connor stopping. Ilya stopping the window from going down, right? And then, like Jess is saying, the choreography of it is literally mirrored. The intentionality that Jacob has as a showrunner, I love. There's an interview that he was doing on What Chaos, which is a hockey podcast, that he's been on it twice. So he was on it after the first 2 or 3 episodes, and then he came back after, which was fun because you got to have a kind of full circle conversations. And also my favorite shtick about them is that they are most angry with the man in the crease in Numhouse.
They do. They hate the fake
hate
podcast
the
on the
podcast
show.
so much for how mean they are to Scott Hunter, especially. But Jacob he's great when he was talking about that song, for instance. He was like, one of the first things he did was clear the music for I Believe in Anything, because he was like, if we didn't get that, I would have to rewrite, because Elena says like, you deserve sunshine, because they're setting up that tie-in.
Right.
He talked about how he actually wanted to use the song in an earlier episode, and he realized like, no, the only thing we'll use is like the opening chords when Scott's running, and then we'll come back to it at episode 5. Like the intentionality behind the choreography of the sound and the music and the needle drops and all of it is so intentional. And like I also just really like Jacob, like you should just go listen to Jacob talk about the show because it's fun, whether it's jokingly talking about how phallic they made all of the logos. So he talks
teams.
about like it's either a top or bottom. So Boston looks phallic and Shane's
Metros.
the Montreal Metros look like they're receiving looks like an ass. But he talked about like the Houston Drillers that was just like a oil rig spouting oil, things like that. But also like his response to people who were like, oh, this is not realistic gay sex. He was like, it's a show. Like you want to spend an hour watching them prep. Like you gotta like everybody go touch grass and breathe. And I like really appreciate that. But I do think it's so clear. Me and Jess have talked about this a lot. Like the cast and crew so clearly have thought about the material and understood these characters, whether it's about Shane presenting his undiagnosed autistic character, which was Jacob's in Hudson's collaborative kind of take on the character, which Rachel Reed confirms that that's canon, even though she didn't necessarily intend for that. She realized sometime during the long game that was probably what was happening, but that allowed like Jacob to work with Hudson to draw upon that interiority and to think about that autism doesn't have to look these certain ways. It can look like you're frozen in a room. It can look like meticulous planning. It can look like how can you embody that?
I think people who haven't worked in sports would be really surprised to learn how many athletes are probably undiagnosed autistic.
Yeah. I mean, my youngest has high functioning autism, and his hyperfixation is basketball.
Right.
And it is you can see how that impacts his game because he has to take 150 shots every day. And
How that can make you great.
He's a tremendous
Steph
shooter.
Curry. Like,
you know, like because of this. And so I do think like, but that kind of depth that we see through production is, I think, the other thing that like has drawn us to this adaptation, because it feels like people really get the source material. And one of the things Jacob said early on in early interviews, I think after only episode 1 or 2 was out, he was like, listen, we did this with Crave for a reason. Like some of the American execs we talked to wanted to make a million plot lines about like all 20 people on the team.
Like think of Bridgerton.
Like Bridgerton.
If you've watched
like,
Bridgerton,
right. We're following a million storylines. Like, what are you doing? And he has this quote where he was like, why get the rights to something that obviously works, that has the fan base, and then change it? He was like, you think you're smarter than the fan base? Like, good luck to you. And that type of faithfulness to the material and intentionality about when you expand on it is just like, I want that for all adaptations.
All right, so I'm not going to keep you for very much longer, but I do have a couple of things that I did definitely want to get to. So one is, you brought up the scene with Shane and his mother at the cottage, and I thought that was so beautiful for so many reasons, but I also thought it kind of spoke to something that could either be taken as a good thing or a critique throughout the show, which is kind of the unspoken stuff, or the stuff that we usually kind of see in especially the gay genre, where there was no like, oh my God, I have to like reconcile with the fact that my son is gay. Like there wasn't an actual like fear of him being gay itself. It was about the consequences and things like that. And similarly, we don't see any overt homophobia from the teammates, which is, the homophobia in the like it's a thing that's talked about, but it doesn't seem to be like nobody's, really thrown around the F word and things like that. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on kind of that dynamic, that it's like, I mean, again, it's an idealized version of this world, but them being gay isn't an individual problem once they come out to their Shane's mom or things like that.
I think a few things happening here. One, I think we get homophobia latently in various ways, whether they're watching the thing and they're calling him a cocksucking Russian. It's in the discourse. If you listen to it, a lot of it's on background, but that's, I think, true. It's in the presumption of like, what are you doing? Why you want to, here's this yoga instructor I want to set you up with. You don't have a kid. Like it's in these kind of pressures and expectations.
The assumption that they're always texting with a woman that they're going to see in Boston, or like, I mean, that's all. And then you get Scott Hunter saying it explicitly in his acceptance speech in episode 6 that he's heard it, but you don't have to yourself hear it.
And you get it from Alexei too, who's constantly calling his brother.
Yes, you get it from the brother. F-word. Yes,
his brother, who is decidedly a villain in all of the ways.
Oh yeah.
I will say the thing about Heated Rivalry as a book, it's really internal. Actually, Hudson said this last night on Fallon. Like that's very internal. It's about their own kind of reckoning with each other. The Long Game is about those external pressures. Yes. So much of that book is about mental health, but it's also about the fact that this is different in different locker rooms. There's some locker rooms in the league that we'll come to find out. I guess for those who haven't read the book in 2027, you'll figure this out. There's some locker rooms that are more open. There's some that are more toxic. There's some that are more homophobic. The league and the commissioner is absolutely the villain of book 2. There's a lot of
coming
discourse.
Is what she's saying.
Well, no wonder they're sending out press releases. Listen,
yeah, they open up well, this is like my favorite thing about like the NHL embrace. They're like, wait till they realize like this show about me when they get to Scott's speech, because they were like, they point out when he's giving the speech, there's only a smattering of applause, and they were like, and that's true. Like people wouldn't have been like standing ovation to that. It would have been like awkward, and also like from the get go. And we want to shout out to Harrison Brown's cameo. Openly trans hockey player who has a cameo in this show. But in The Long Game, there's also a trans masked character who talks about how much they love hockey and how much it hurts to have the thing that they love hurt them as well. And that's like from jump in The Long Game. So I do think a lot of that is coming more. And also the big thing here, right, and this is the rivalry part of this, and this continues through both books, that the issue that people have is, like you said, even their closest people to them is not necessarily that they're gay, but who they are with.
I mean, that's one of the fun things about Yuna in that scene is she's like, you're going to leave the team, but why aren't you loyal to them, right? Like she brings that hockey fan mentality into the room, which feels
And also, I'm just going to
bananas.
say the Asian mom thing for sure. Like,
But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, part of it is the fantasy, right? Like they are maintaining like that we're not as fans having to watch them wade through that personally, but it is all implied in the choices that they're making.
For sure. One of my favorite aspects of the show is the Svetlana Ilya relationship.
Yeah.
And I say this not just because she's like phenomenal and really, but I am also a woman who has had a lot of undefined relationships with men that I love in my life. And I love that this is a show that subtle's not really the word, but it's not made a big deal of, that they clearly love each other. They're not interested in marrying each other. They're not each other's soulmates or anything like that, but that's still a relationship that's worth having. And I don't think we see enough of those kinds of depictions on screen. And I really love that.
This goes right back to your question of like, why do women like the show? Like, yeah, I think lots of women have had relationships with men where it is lovely to see that type of thing on screen because you don't a lot. You get some of it with Rose and Shane too, like to see them as good friends, men who can love the women in their life, even if they don't necessarily want to marry them or in Shane's case, sleep with them, right? Like that is, again, just answers the question of like why this is such a lovely show to watch, why people are so.
Absolutely.
God, we've talked for an hour and a half about this, and I could talk to you for another hour probably. But
Good with the edit. This was so much fun, Kavitha. Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much.
I'm going to go watch the show again right now.
100%.
Oh, rewatch it. And if you like rewatching it to reactors watching it.
Yeah, please send me some of those reactors because
I
I'm
will, 'cause
also
the
going to
real
start reading the
reacts-
books.
Yeah, the real reacts guys. There's one who has glasses and every time he cries, they fog up and his nose turns red. And watching his face get more red while he fights
Bless
his
his
tears.
heart. I feel for him.
It's my favorite
I'm so
thing.
empathetic to
it's
that
like
with my
actually
little.
my favorite thing. So
Can
yeah.
I just want to say one more thing about all of this is that there is so much more queer sports romance out there. And like we're getting it all the time now. Huge up for Katie Casey. Has a bunch of baseball MM books that are just so beautiful. Kat Sebastian has a great historical baseball romance. Meryl Wilsner last year came out with Cleat Cute, which is sapphic soccer, which like, of course, we have so many models for gay professional athletes and relationships. It's one of the reasons that we all talk about the W and NWSL being so great is that all these players are dating and then
The captain
playing
of the
against
U.S.
each other.
women's national hockey team and the captain of the Canadian women's national hockey team formerly are married.
Yes. So like we have all these wonderful models and why this is so great when they're actually out and playing against each other. But there is just so much like that. You can, if you Google at this point, there's so many great lists of queer sports romance that exist in the wake of Heated Rivalry. So like if you're like, okay, I'm not a hockey person, I want more diversity, I want whatever, like it is out there and people are writing it right now. I just saw, I think this month, and I can't remember the name, but there's like a new sapphic tennis novel. And I was like, oh, I'm going to read that. So I was trying to Google it to find it. I need to put it on my to read list, but like, go out there, find it. It is there and it is wonderful. And I hope that this is a gateway for people who loved this. There's so much more out there. You can have lots of happy ever afters.
And for many people, I would also say that part of this experience has been great because it has been about community and exchange and collectiveness in a way that, like, as you said, right now we're living in a time that's not always.
Isn't it so fun on social media when you suddenly see a new friend post a meme and you're like, oh, you're like,
yes, you're in it.
Oh, you found it too.
But I do say, like, for me too, like, it's very important for me to see my daughter and her friends are all queer to be able to also have this kind of media available to them. And my daughter's a voracious reader and has like a book talk that she has a million drafts. She never like releases it, but she'll send it to her friends and like all of them talking. And like the peak of my adulting, my parenting, was my daughter was at work and her best friend finished episode 5, and I got a capital letters text from him that was like, I just finished episode 5. I have nobody to talk to because Samari's at work, but I just had to tell somebody that I finished it, and oh my gosh. And I was just like, yes.
I know if you've made it to this point in the conversation and you have not watched this and you have not experienced episode 5, you just stop and go do it.
Just do it.
It will make your life so much better to have experienced episode 5.
I will say, I knew I would need to binge this, and I had it on my list. But the thing that reminded me to do it was just when you posted the meme of them at the cottage and they're in front of the fireplace, and Ilya just goes, "So we just sit here." And that's the fun.
The show's very funny. Ilya is
so
very funny.
Like the dryness.
I mean, kudos to Connor's story for the accent and the Russian and all these other things, but like his comedic timing in this show is so perfect.
And just that's what we do. Canada's fun. All right. Well, this was so much fun. I love you both. Let's talk about this shit offline also, because we've got,
absolutely.
I'm so excited.
Anytime you want, Kavitha.
Me and Jessica have a ridiculous amount of the slate advice column. Did you tell Kavitha?
I did
you
not.
see it, Kavitha?
No.
There was some guy who wrote. Well, we don't know if it was a guy, but we know it's a guy who wrote to the Slate people and was like, my girlfriend's obsessed with the show. Should I be concerned?
And the advice columnist was like, first did 2 paragraphs about why they were also obsessed with the show. And then was like, I mean, leave her alone. And then also went back to talking about how they're trying to separate themselves from the show to come back from the psychosis. And so they've tried to have work hours and Heated Rivalry hours. And they were wondering if writing this advice column was technically a work hour, even though it was about Heated Rivalry.
They got to think about Heated Rivalry.
I was like, when you ask for advice because somebody in your life is obsessed with the show and the person you're asking advice is, it's like, yeah, no, I'm obsessed too.
Right.
It was so funny.
That's amazing.
It has just been such joy. Thank you to Rachel Reed and Jacob Tierney and Connor Story and Hudson Williams. Like, thank you so much for this. Yes.
And don't make us wait too long until season 2.
And the Canadian taxpayers.
And the Canadian taxpayers.
Thank you, Canada.
Yes.
Thank you, Canadians. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning into Sportly. Tune in next week and every week after as we dive into another great story. And if you have thoughts or suggestions for a topic you'd like me to cover, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to email me at kavitha@immigrantlypod.com. And if you like what you're hearing, rate and review us on your favorite podcast app. Sportly is an Immigrantly Media production. This episode was produced by Paroma Chakravarti. Our executive producer is Sadia Khan. Our sound designer and editor is Paroma Chakravarti. Our theme music was created by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Tune back in next week and every week after for more Sportly.